Welcome to Dr. Tammy's Life Flip. And one of the most beautiful things that we do with Life Flip is we have the choice in any given moment that we can look at the positive or we can look at the negative on things. So we've been spreading the API movement, which is really exciting. Thank you, everyone, for helping spread the API movement. I hope that's going really well for you. Please send me your comments, your pictures. Let me know how that's going for you. So that's really exciting. So welcome to Dr. Tammy's Life Flip. This is Module 5, Unraveling Your Story and Creating a New Story. So why is it important to unravel your story and make a new story? Because there may be some things in your old story that may be holding you back. So in Module 1, we did deep dive into conscious engineering. So that's a great module. You might want to look at that. And I talk about the different stages and how you need to be in stage 3 or 4 to really create from a wonderful positive place. We're always creating. So if things aren't showing up the way you want them to, you might not be creating from the right positive place, right? So module 2 is creative sensorization. So that was goal setting on steroids. So hopefully you've watched that one and that was a helpful one for you. Module 3 was self-discovery and branding yourself. And all these modules are available on YouTube, on Better Living RX's YouTube channel, or you can just type in Dr. Tammy and you should be able to find them. And they're all on my Facebook page too. So if you're my Facebook friend, you should be able to find those as well. And module 4 is blueprint redesign for your life. And we just did that one last night. And that was talking about your blueprint has to match up to what you think your life should look like. You know, I always say stop shooting on yourself. But your blueprint has to match up to what you want in your life to help you be happy. So when we talk about your story has to match up too, or you're not going to be happy. So if in areas of your life where things are going really well, it's because your blueprint or your story is matched up to what you want to be happening. So it's really important to talk about your story. And if it's not serving you, or there's some limiting beliefs that are kind of hiding in there, ready to bite you in the butt, kind of like a little snake hiding, then you might want to undo some of those stories just a little bit. And then next module is going to be discover your passion. So that's a really fun one. So we're just building up until helping you discover your passion. So that's fun. So what's your story? When you do this exercise, maybe not on Facebook Live today since you're here with me on lunch, but when you sit down and do this and you do it off of the modules that I have recorded on YouTube, I want you to pause it and I want you to take a little time and just write a paragraph of what your story is. And so sometimes people will write, well, I was born blah, 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 to blah, 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 and this happened, blah, blah, blah. My story has changed. My story used to be, I was born on the autistic spectrum. I didn't speak till I was almost 5 years old. I had a lot of educational challenges in school. I was pretty much dyslexic. I had a lot of learning issues. I was a lot of sensory issues. And my parents were quirky and crazy. My dad was an inventor. We always had financial instability in our lives. He was a little bit, with his issues, he had emotional instability, which, led to some abuse and things like that in our lives. And so, that was my story. I went to med school because I, wanted to change all that, and I wanted stability, and I wanted to be able to take care of my dad, and, that was my story. My story now is completely different. My story now is that I was born in an agreement with many, many people in my social sphere to have experiences, and that they would contribute to those experiences so that I could come here and I could splash around and I could understand contrast. That I would have those experiences and they might not always feel good at the time, but that I would always be committed to feeling good. And then in any given situation, I would move into a space to feel better or feel good. And I was born with sensory heightened experiences because it made me really in tune to things, almost psychic. I knew things before they happened, made me an intuitive healer, made me very sensitive to energies around me, made me sensitive to threats, which I'm now coming to understand with API that I was a little too sensitive to threats. And so now I've moved into being sensitive to looking for positive intent. But that's my story. And it made me a beautiful, intuitive, creative, quirky, kind of strange, nerdy healer. And that's my new story. And I understand that my parents were just doing the best they could. And I don't see any of the abuse anymore. I just see really stressed out people who were just really trying to do the best they could. Now, I'm not saying that it's okay to abuse kids or, whatever the situation is. It's not okay to take a kid with sensory issues or autism or anything like that and to put them into difficult situations. I'm not saying that's okay, but I am saying that I took my experience and I'm looking for the positive in those experiences so that I can help other people through that. So, whatever your story is, we've all got a story. We've all got trauma. We've all got skeletons in our closet. If you think that there's someone who doesn't, then they're just really good at hiding it. In fact, when I first met my husband, it was kind of funny because the first thing he said to me, he's a therapist. He's a world-renowned therapist. He travels around the U.S. Working with traumatized foster and adopted kids. And when I first met him, he said, "What's your trauma?" I'm like, "I don't have a trauma." Who are you? He's like, everybody's got a trauma. So, it's just really interesting because as we talked, I was like, I started to realize and started uncovering what my story was that I'd been telling. And I'd been telling a huge story of trauma for many, many years. And sometimes I was just telling it to myself. And I was using that to argue for all my limitations. Well, I don't connect with people well, so I can't be blah, blah, blah. Or, I have issues with learning new things because I have learning disabilities or whatever, and I argued for my limitations for so many years. So I found that changing my story was really, really powerful in moving forward. So, what's your story? So, take some time and write what your story was, and then we're going to flip it, of course, because that's what we do in Life Flip, right? So, why might you need a new story? Well, here's why you might need a new story. You might need to think about what's your relationship story. So, and this can be with a significant other, this can be with a spouse, this can be with your brothers or sisters. What's your relationship story? And do you like what's showing up right now? So, if you're fighting with your siblings or if you're fighting with your spouse a lot or you're not happy in a relationship, you might need to look at your relationship story. When I did that, I had to look back and I looked at, there was a particular time when my husband and I were, having we were disagreeing before I knew about API, right? And we were disagreeing a lot. And so I had to step back and look at my story. What's my relationship story? And so usually what you do when you look at your story, you have to go back to the beginning of the story. So I looked at my childhood and my mother, bless her heart, she's in the South. If you say bless your heart, you can say anything after that, right? So my mother was very negative. She was always looking for the threat. She clearly did not know about API. But she gave my dad a really hard time with a lot of things. She nagged a lot and she was always like, why don't you ever do anything right? And that's just kind of the story that I learned. And so I realized that I had been programmed with a lot of negativity. And my mom thought she was doing it for the best interest of the family, that if she was nagging my dad, that he would, through fear and control, she could get him to do different things. That it never worked. But, that was kind of my story. And so I had to go, you know what? I am doing that. And my mom was really passive aggressive, if you know what that means. So you try to be a little aggressive to kind of get your needs met. And then when they kind of buck up just a little bit, then you get real passive and you're like, well, I didn't mean it that way. And then you get aggressive again. And then you kind of slide back into that. So throughout my relationship story, I had to kind of look at that and I had to kind of say, what am I doing? What am I doing in relationship and how am I showing up? And what was my story and what do I want my flip story to be? I said in the module yesterday that we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in a day. And 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts. So give some thought to what you're thinking in regards to your story about relationship. What's your money story? What's your abundance story? Do you have all of the money and the abundance showing up in your life that you want right now? And if the answer to that is no, you've got some story there. And in that story is your blocks, is your limiting beliefs that are keeping you from moving forward into that abundance, into that money. And I always tell people, Money is just energy. And so there's some sort of energy block there if you don't have the amount of money that you want in your life right now. And so many people really get challenged by money because money is such a huge energy. And money only represents freedom, because the more money you have, the more freedom you have to be able to have the things that you want in your life. So it's just energy. So if you have this limiting belief and your story is there's not enough money, there's not enough abundance, there's not enough, then that's the story that you start to adopt. And I had that story. So when I was little and my parents, worked, and my dad was an inventor, he was an electrician, and they always had money issues, I learned that you kind of have money for a little while and then you don't, and then you kind of have money for a little while, and then maybe you sell an invention or maybe you do something big and then you have a little chunk of money, and then you just kind of blow it. So my money story was a lot of instability. So when I decided to go to medical school, that was one of the things that I was trying to undo, was that money story. But what I found was that I still always had that scarcity mentality because my story didn't change. So my situation changed, but my story didn't change. So it also works in reverse, that if you can change your story, your situation will change. So it's just so powerful when you start moving into that, because I kept hanging on to that old story. And no matter how much money I had, and no matter how many houses or how many cars or whatever I had in my life, I still felt the scarcity. I still felt like there always wasn't enough. I always felt that lack of security and stability until I looked at this story and I was like, that's not my story. That's not my story at all. That was my parents' story, and sometimes it's interesting. They've done research to show that um, stories can actually be carried down in DNA. So sometimes you might have to look at your parents or your grandparents' stories to kind of see where those limiting beliefs are. They've done all sorts of research with different animals, with fear triggers and things like that, and showing that when you take the parents of like a rat and you trigger some sort of adverse thing and some fear in them and they don't respond to pushing a button or something like that, that actually the DNA actually carries that memory. And so some of our stuff is not even our story, it's a generational story. So sometimes you just have to just honor that. I don't know why I'm feeling the way I feel about that. I don't really have any reason. Maybe I'm just carrying something in my DNA. And I love the clearing experience of just honoring, acknowledging, and releasing. There's a little thing I have at the end here. The Hawaiians have a process called Ho'oponopono, which is kind of that clearing process. So anytime you just kind of bump up against the wall and you're like, I don't know why I seem to have this limiting belief or this story, I don't really have any reason for it. Sometimes you just kind of have to do that little prayer meditation and just say, I don't know why, but I'm just going to release it. What's your career story? So my career story was, because of all the financial instability with my parents, my career story was I'm going to go to medical school and have something stable, when really what I wanted to do was I wanted to go to Hollywood. I wanted to be a model. I wanted to be, that's what I wanted. So I let my story interfere. So you can let your story interfere with what it is that you actually want to do, because if you're tied into, saying, well, the financial security is more important than what I really want to do, then you just get really stuck and you don't really end up following your dreams. So, what's your career story? If you were to look back on your life, it's funny. I was on the computer the other day and I was looking for some pictures for these presentations. And I saw pictures of my son, pictures of my husband, pictures of my parents and my brothers. And it was just like scrolling through just literally pages and pages of pictures. And now that we keep pictures archived on computers and stuff, it was just thousands of pictures. And each one of those pictures represented a point of time in my life. And I was realizing that all of those times in my life add up to how many hours of my life, being almost 50 years old, that's almost 50 years of footage that I've accumulated into my story. So I don't want you to throw away any of your story. All of your story is valuable. But what I want you to do is to begin to look at the parts of your story that are limiting you from the next part of your life for the next 50 years or however many ever years you have on this physical existence, and to remove those limitations, to remove those limiting blocks, so you can really get cleared up from that, because your story's beautiful, your story's delicious, and I am a storyteller. I love it. I love to write fiction. I love the the beauty and the art of the story. So one of the things that I'm going to take you through in this module today is how to write a story. And the script is the most important part. So having a script is really important. That's why I talked about in one of the modules writing your obituary, because it's reverse engineering your life. If you know what you want to accomplish and what you want them to say about you in your obituary, and you reverse engineer your life to that, that's a delicious way to develop your story in reverse, so that you make sure that you get all of those elements in there that you want to get in. So that's a really fun thing. But all of that's really important in the footage. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit real with you here for just a minute. And one of the hardest things I do in my workshops is when I get real with people. And I think of the things that I tell people as a download from upstairs. That's what I call it, because sometimes I'll have someone who will show up to a workshop and they'll be really arguing for their limiting beliefs, and they'll be really negative and really stuck. And but what about this? But what about this? You know, I'm always teasing that we should get a jar, and every time you say but, you have to put $1 in the jar. So, when it comes up that people are really arguing for their limiting beliefs, sometimes I have to get really real with them. So, my little disclaimer right now is I'm going to get really real with you. If there is any area in your life where you have felt like you've not succeeded, it's your own damn fault. And I say that from the most loving place. And that was one of the hardest things that I had to do, because when I looked at the areas of my life where I felt like I didn't succeed, I had to really take inventory and take personal responsibility and say, you know what? I didn't I didn't do all that I could. I didn't show up in all the ways that I could. And part of that was because I had all these limiting beliefs that were holding me back, parts of my story that said you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. And it's not about having resources, it's about being resourceful. So anytime that you haven't accomplished something in your life, there's been some area where you just haven't gone the distance and really showed up. So it's really hard for me to be real with people sometimes. But one of the things that I love, this saying from Jim Rohn, is if you really want something, you'll find a way. And if you don't, you'll find an excuse. So if you really want something, you will find the resources. You will make it happen. I heard somebody say one time, if your life depended on it and you had to come up with $1 million for a ransom or something like that for your child, you would find a way to come up with $1 million. But if you just think, oh, it'd be nice to have $1 million, you're really not that motivated to come up with $1 million. So it really is about what you want and what your level of motivation is. So if there's any area in your life, just got to be real with you. It is because you've not done the work, or there's something missing. And having an ego, being a human with an ego, and I think the ego is delicious. It keeps us like in stage 1 or stage 2, and it's fun to splash around in ego. It's fun to have drama. But when it doesn't serve you anymore, and it doesn't feel good, or you're so depressed that you're thinking about ending your life, or it just doesn't feel good anymore, you don't like the way things are showing up, then you got to make different choices, and you got to start flipping that stuff a little bit. So sometimes you got to get real with people, and you have to say you're not doing the work. And it's really interesting, because my husband, who is just amazing, he's always like stage 3 or stage 4. He's just so, he's like Buddha. I mean, it's crazy. But sometimes he'll say, Tammy, you're making excuses. You're arguing for your limitations. You're not doing the work. And I'm like, but I tried it, and it just wasn't working. And nobody likes me, and it's just not working. And it's enough already. So you just like have to step up and say, you know what? I wasn't doing the work. We were talking about creating a TV show, and I was like, well, I created a TV show one time and it didn't work. I just totally failed at it. And he was like, no, you didn't. He said, you made a commercial. I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't really make a TV show. So, it's like when I look at things, or I was like, I read a book and it didn't work out. I wasn't a bestseller. He was like, did you really boost it? Did you really work at that? And the truth was, no, I really didn't. So, I kind of just half-assed it a little bit. So, if you really want something in your life, you really have to show up to it and you really have to put everything in it. And there's this thing called the law of opposites that shows up, and it will really the universe will ask you, do you really want this? And when that shows up, when the resistance shows up, that's when you say, yeah, I really want this. I really want this. So you may have to face the law of opposites a little bit, but when that shows up, that just tells you that you're on the right track, that it's something really worth having, right? So, what is the process to rewriting your story? Well, the process number one is to remove resistance, to recognize your blocks and your limiting beliefs that don't serve you, and then flip them. So that's the whole point of today with your story. And I love the saying that life is not about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. So it's not about finding your story and finding the limitations in that. It truly is about creating something new in your story moving forward. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a little kind of a rendition of a time machine clock. So, have you ever wondered or ever thought, I wish I had a time machine. I wish I could go back. And really when I reflect on my life, there's really nothing I would change because it's all perfect the way it is. It's made me exactly who I am. But I want to tell you, and this will probably blow you away, that you really can change the past. I know that seems like really crazy. And like the first time I heard this, I was like, what? Are they crazy? You can't go back in time and you can't change the past, but you really can. And this is how you do it. You literally, when you have a memory, you literally go back there and you live that moment. And your body, your physiologic response, your adrenal glands, your thyroid gland, your pituitary gland in your head, your brain, all of those brain processing centers live that moment the way you remember it. So if you can change your thoughts and you can change your story, you can actually go back in time and rearrange that story so that it serves you better for your future. And that is the beauty of the inner world. So you can't change the outer world and you can't change maybe what came about because of that story. If someone abused you and broke your leg, you can't change that bone is maybe, internally different than it was before that. So we can't change the physical outer world, but we can change the inner world. And when you change the inner world, it changes everything. Because the only reason you ever feel pain is because you feel loss. And if you feel like you experience loss in that moment, then that's where you feel the pain. So if you can go back in time, recreate the story, and take the loss out of it, it takes the pain out of it. And when you take the pain out of it, the story changes. So when I tell the story of having an abusive father, I have terrible pain associated with that. It limits me, it creates all sorts of drama, it affects all the relationships of all the people who knew my father, and it's really a hard life to live in a grown up, traumatized brain. But when I go back in time and I see that my father was really stressed out, that he came from an abusive home himself, that he was on a lot of medications for a lot of physical issues that he had, and I just realized that he really loved me and he really was doing the best he could, it completely changes my story and it changes who I am and it softens me and it changes assuming the positive intent. It softens me to love him in a way that I never was able to love him. And, it's funny because my youngest brother has carried a story of extreme abuse towards my father. And I've just really reflected on that lately because it had me tied into his story too. And we're both really good storytellers. He's a novelist. In fact, he's working on, kind of writing and doing a lot of creative things right now. So I'm so proud of him. But because we're writers and because we're really creative, and everyone is, I mean, it's just some people have a little more gifts in one area because we are, and we're really good exaggerators and we are really good, we embellish and it's all beautiful and it's just, bigger than life. We also exaggerate the negative. And so we've carried a lot of pain and we've carried a lot of torture, and we've kind of inflicted that pain and torture on each other too, rehashing the memory in a negative way. And so I've really worked on that with him, and in the past few months, to really say we got to change our story about that. And I really am beginning to see that my dad really did love us. He really did do the best he could. And I'm not a perfect parent, and I've done lots of things that I'm really not proud of, with my child. And so, nobody's perfect. And so just being able to love him instead of being angry at him has really changed everything for me. So whatever is your story that you're hanging on to, trauma, abuse, again, I'm not saying it was okay. I'm not saying it's, you're giving permission to any of that. But I am saying that the only torture that you have is literally your inner world between your two ears, because nobody else is, being affected by it. And if you allow it to affect you or allow it to have limiting beliefs, it just will crush you. Especially if you had parents, now this didn't happen to me, but if you had parents who were negative in a way that said, you're just a piece of crap, you can't do anything. I mean, that really kind of gets into your head. It starts to mess with you when you start trying to do things in life. So if you had that experience, it's a little bit more to overcome that kind of abuse, because it really kind of affects you, especially when you're young and so impressionable, like a little sponge. So those are some things that you might want to look at too. But you literally can change the past by changing the way you feel about the past. And you might not believe that's exactly true, but try it. It's so powerful. And if you do it in a meditation or a prayer, it's really, really powerful. So I highly recommend that. So, who are you? Well, who you are is made up of your story, basically. And we talked about in self branding, what you bring to the world. Your self worth is where you manifest from. And we are all children of God. We are all creators, co creators. We are connected to God and we're connected to each other. I truly believe that. So I'm not even going to apologize for that belief, because I truly believe that that is the truth. So, what makes us all different and what makes our experiences so different and so contrasting is all the different colors and flavors that we bring. So I love the analogy of you're like a cake, and all the ingredients make up that cake. So if you were just to eat flour, you'd have like powder all in your mouth. You couldn't just eat flour. You couldn't just eat butter, because that'd be kind of gross. But when you put all that flour and that butter and that sugar together and you make the cake, it's a delicious thing. But if you just looked at the flour by itself and you just looked at the powder and it was all messy, you'd say, well, that cake's no good because it's got flour in it. But the flour was a necessary part of it. So I just really want you to think about being like a cake, that you're many, many ingredients. And some of those ingredients are pain and tragedy, and some of those are, all sorts of different emotions, but they all make up that cake and they're all an important part of it. Okay, so let's talk about what is a story. Well, a story always starts out where there's a beginning, right? And so that's kind of you coming into this physical existence. And then the characters meet some kind of conflict. So conflict is so important in a story, and it's what we came here to do. We came here to experience contrast and just have experience, because like floating around in heaven all day, you don't get the drama. You don't get to be a part of the chaos and the craziness. And so, yeah, that's all great, but that gets old. So you want to come splash around. So, then you have this conflict, right? Well, and then it builds to a climax. And then we usually have some sort of resolution. And we have many, many stories throughout our life. So we have little, dips and little up and little downs. And what is it they say? Like an EKG, if it were flatlined, you'd be dead, right? So you have to have those blips, those little ups and downs. So your story basically is so powerful, and your story is a delicious thing, because if you were in business, I'm going to kind of put on my business and kind of business coaching hat for just a minute. The way you connect with your clients, or the way you connect with the people that you want to do business with, is through your story. So number one, you got to make sure you got a really positive, abundant story, because you want to be able to connect through positivity, especially if it's in a business relationship, right? But your story allows you to connect with them in a way that just talking about your services or talking about what you do does not really connect with them. So let's say you're a doctor and you can say, well, I prescribe hormones and I, help people feel better. And I prescribe meal plans and I, do some life coaching. And you're like, yeah, whatever. Great. Good for you. Sounds exciting. But if I tell you a story, so I'm going to tell you a story. Have you ever thought you were going to die? Have you ever been on the verge of death and come back? Have you ever had a scare? Have you ever had a medical scare? Have you ever wondered, is this the end? Well, I did. I was in the ICU. I couldn't breathe. I was 8 months pregnant. I had pneumonia, I had whiteout, I had ARDS, almost died. And I came back from that. And after that, everything looked different. And I wanted to help people live healthier, better lives. And I realized through that near death experience that I'd had health problems my whole life, that now I was pregnant, I was compromised, I'd had fertility problems, I had all sorts of hormone issues, and I wanted to help myself get better and live. I wanted to live. And now I want to help other people live, and I want to help them feel better. And through that journey, I discovered how to come back from the most horrendous near death experience and to change that and to want to help people feel better and to help people be healthier so that they don't have to face those kinds of experiences. And that's a story. And that's a story that if you're struggling and that resonates with you, that will give you some sort of connection with me so that you know that I care. Because what is it they say in business? They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They know that I'm going to care because I have a story. So you want to make sure that everybody's got the dips, right? Everybody's had a bad experience, and that's perfectly okay to have a dip. You have to have a dip. It's what builds the drama. It's what builds your character. So it's okay to have that dip. So what's your dip in your story? And then how does that impact what you do? So really think about what your story is and how you can create that dip to kind of build a little drama, to build some connection, because everybody's got a dip, and then how that impacted you and how going forward you want to make a change with people. Okay, so let's talk about the hero's journey. I love the hero's journey. I love superheroes. I love everything that's really big and exaggerated. And the hero's journey usually has some sort of call to adventure and a refusal of call. So even like the Bible heroes, like Jonah, he didn't want to go preach when God told him to, and he ended up in the belly of the whale. So, I mean, well, how much drama can you get? He's in the belly of a whale. So, a refusal to the call. So, I want you to think in your life, when have you had a refusal to the call? When did life show up and say, hey, it's your time? And you're like, I'm not good enough. And no, sticking to my story. I'm sticking to my limiting beliefs. I'm sticking to my limitations. And where in your life did you not step up to your story? And when you're on your deathbed, the only unhappiness that you are going to feel is the regret of the things that you didn't do, the refusal to the call of action, the things you didn't step up to. So, I usually think when I get afraid to do something, I usually think, I'm going to weigh this fear out. Is the fear of not doing it and the fear of feeling like, oh my gosh, I didn't do that, and the fear of feeling like I should have done that? What would my life have been different like? That fear is always greater to me than the fear of anybody laughing at me or not being good enough or being embarrassed or, trying something that doesn't really work out. So I usually focus on, it's okay to focus on a little fear in that sense. The fear of not going for something. What does that look like? So I think people who are really successful and really driven, that's the difference, is that they're more worried about the not doing something and how they're going to feel because they didn't step up and step into it than living a mediocre life. And, maybe there's some programming in people who just are okay with living a mediocre life, but that's probably not you if you're taking the time to listen to me today. So I love the hero's journey because it's got that extra added refusal to the call and the separation and a little bit more initiation, a little more trial. Because a hero, to be a really big hero, has to go through a whole lot of crap. So there's always more intense drama and things in the hero's story. There's always some dragon or something big. Ooh, and I want to share a little dragon story with you. This is really fun. I heard someone on a TED Talk who was talking about, have you ever had like a projector in a presentation? And you put the projector up and you shine a, maybe if you had a picture of a dragon and you put a picture of a dragon up on the wall, so you see the dragon, right? Well, what happens if you pick up the projector and you move back? You move away from the dragon. The dragon actually gets bigger, right, on the wall the further you move back with the projector. But if you move forward with the projector, what happens to the dragon? He gets little bitty, small, 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 small. And what happens if you put the projector up to the wall? The dragon absolutely goes away. So I think that's really powerful when you're moving forward in your life and you're living your story and you're letting things get in the way and you're like, oh, the dragons, oh, I'm so scared. And sometimes you just got to pick up the projector and put it against the wall and go away, stop it. You know, it's kind of like fear. I teach people in my stress classes that fear is mostly the unknown. You know, if you hear a noise in your bedroom, get up and turn the light on and look, and then you can go back to sleep. But if you just lay there and lay there and lay there and think, oh my gosh, what was that noise? What was that noise? It just gets worse and worse. The dragon gets bigger. So dragons are always in the hero's journey. So it's good to like have the dragons and splash around with the dragons. But you know what? When you're done with the dragons, just push that projector up to the wall and squish them down. This is something that we forget a lot. And that is that you get to choose your life. You get to choose the way you see it. You get to choose your script. You might need a new script, and that's okay. That's what goal setting is all about, writing a new script, right? You get to choose your dialogue. And I love telling people that if you're in an argument with someone, it takes two people to maintain that argument. And you're creating the dialogue, and you have complete control over the dialogue. So you write the dialogue of your story every single day, every single time that you have an interaction with somebody. And you write the plot. The plot is developed sometimes as you go along, but if you write the plot ahead of time, you can actually not only go back in time and change the past, but you can change the future based on changing your plot. So you have complete control over the plot of your story. And, okay, here's a big one. And this is always kind of a hard thing to say. You also get to choose your cast of characters. Every single day you get to choose your cast of characters. And if there are characters who make your story more interesting and they're dramatic and you can handle that, and it is what it is, and whatever, you want to be stage 1 or stage 2, that's perfectly fine. But when you want different cast of characters, you can just pick a different cast of characters, and you don't have to stick to any old stories. You can just say, you know what, I want a new cast of characters today. And you can be that new person any day that you want to be. And, sometimes, especially with family, it's really hard because we have so much history and we have so much, even if it's dysfunctional, it's comfortable dysfunction. So we just keep playing with those cast of characters, but you don't have to. You just really don't. Your story can be completely different at any time. So I want to talk about the gifts of tragedy, the gifts of betrayal, the gifts of anger, and the gifts of happiness and joy. You have all sorts of experiences in your life. You have lots of happy memories. You have lots of really cool things that happen that you can go back and you can pull from, and they make you who you are. But you also have sad times. You have what we perceive as loss, right? The only time you feel pain is when you feel loss. So if you felt betrayal, it's because you felt loss of some sort of relationship. If you felt anger, it's because you felt loss of some asset. So there really is no such thing as loss. It's all energy. Energy just moves around. So that's a myth. So all loss and all hurt is just between the ears. So, but all of that makes up who you are, and it makes you a part of your story. And so if I didn't have all my experiences, if I didn't have some suffering, or I didn't have some pain in my life, I couldn't really connect with you about the areas where you hurt, and we couldn't, really come together in a more loving and assuming a more positive intent place. So all of those things make you exactly who you are. They don't make you weird, or they don't make you broken. You're not broken. You don't need fixed. It's just you may need to make some different choices. But all of these are like little gifts that just show up in our life. And what you do with it makes all the difference. So let's say someone does something that hurts you or betrays you. if you could look at it as a gift as it's happening and assuming positive intent, it changes everything, right? So what was the old way we did? We just got reactive. We got hurt. We, said things we didn't, weren't really congruent with our higher selves, and we were nasty, and we just kind of were, like, say, reactive. But if you can look in advance at those things that show up in your life, in your outer world, and you can say, wow, that's a gift to me. Thank you. I get to look at something different in a different way. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I said, the only reason you ever get into a relationship with anyone is because you need to look at some unhealed places in your life, or some contrast in your life, or have some experience. And those are the agreements that we come before we even come into this lifetime, that we make, that we're going to splash around and have experiences together. So even if someone, quote, hurts you, it's already a pre-agreed on experience. And so you just have to love them and say, thank you. Thank you that we got to have that experience together. And now I have this new experience, which expands the consciousness of all of us. So it's just a beautiful thing. So they're all gifts. So let's look at your story just a little bit more in depth. Your story is made up of what you've experienced, what you perceive your experiences to be. Again, that's all between the ears, that head war. What others perceive your experience to mean, right? The players, the characters that were in there, and how the experience expanded or limited your choice. So you're either expanded or contracted. So literally, this is why I'm talking about the time machine, going back in time. If you can go back and look at what you experienced and see what you perceive that experience to be, and change that perception. And you can sometimes even change other people's perception. Because like I say, my brother, when he would talk about, how terrible it was growing up and how horrible my dad was, I mean, I really loved my dad. I think for the most part growing up, I never felt abused or neglected, or, I mean, there were things that happened, and it didn't feel good. But for the most part, I thought my dad really loved me. And so, like, as I got older and he's been dead and gone for years, and I listened to my brother's perception of what happened, I think, oh my gosh, I was horribly abused. And then I, like, took the victim's stance for a while, and I was like, oh, I was abused, traumatized child, and that's why I'm so nasty all the time, and that's why I'm just mean, and you just have to deal with me because, oh, it was terrible. And it's all just a bunch of crap, because it just really, there were some bad experiences, or some experiences that contrast didn't really feel good at the time. But it doesn't have to affect who I am, and I can still love my dad, and I can still look back at my history and my childhood, and I can change the past, and I can make it be whatever I wanted it to be, and I can just really assume that positive intent. And the important thing about that is that it doesn't contract me, because a contracted energy is not an open energy, and I can't make anything new in my life if I'm stuck and contracted in that old stuff. And then I also want you to think about what secondary gain or benefit you get from telling your story. So again, when I could be the victim and I could say, oh, it was horrible and I was traumatized, and, then that gives me my limitations. So I can say, oh, do this for me. And I get to be the little princess that everybody just runs around and does everything for. And I can be, continue to be just this victim, and I don't have to do anything. So your secondary gain is sometimes that you can just check out and people will take care of you. So, if that doesn't feel good, because you're a creator, you're only happy when you're creating. So if you let other people do stuff for you and you're not creating, oh my gosh, the most miserable times of my life have been when I've just laid down and rolled over and said, whatever, you just go ahead. I'm just here in the corner. I mean, absolutely the most miserable times of my life. So when I really step into my power and my passion, and I can talk to people about, this journey, and, help them, I'm creating, and it's beautiful. So it's really, really powerful. And I recognize the places where I've gotten secondary gain from my story in the past, and that doesn't really serve me. So that's kind of my myth. So one of the little exercises you can do is you can categorize different areas of your life, and you can talk about your story. So, like, with career and work, you can do past, present, and future. What was your past story about career or work? And what's your present story that you're living? But what do you want your future story to be? And literally, this is how you can look at that, flip that, and go back and change time. in the past or the future. So that's a beautiful thing, because if you didn't look at this, the future might look different if you just kind of continued living your life out from that energy vibration that you're in right now. So it really is about lowering the resistance, becoming an expanded state, and letting opportunity come to you. Because if you don't, that will be one future for you, one path. If you do, there's a different future for you, a different path. So you get to pick it. Lifestyle and fun, you can do it with money and finances or abundance. You can do it with health and wellness. And health and wellness is one of my favorite areas, because people ask me all the time, can you heal the body? The body wants to be well, the body wants to be whole. And you can always heal the body. It wants to be 100%. And it doesn't matter how old you are. People ask me all the time, am I too old to work with you? I'm like, no, absolutely not. There are 80-year-olds who are bodybuilding, who are, I like to always say, jumping out airplanes. I don't know why, but I mean, just living the dream, just being vibrant and being fun and having a good time and just rocking this experience, rather than being 80 and being in a nursing home and demented and not knowing where you are, who you are, and incontinent and all those kinds of things. What's your choice? I mean, one way leads one path, the other way leads another path. So you get to pick your story. So you can not only change your past, but you can change your future. You can do this with family and friends, past, present, future, love and romance, past, present, and future, and your personal growth and your spirituality, past, present, and future. If I looked at my spirituality, my past was very heavy in the box of religion. I was raised very strict, religious, and oh my gosh, didn't even like date till I went to college. And I just very, very, very strict upbringing. My dad was so strict, and just all this religious box, fear, hellfire, damnation. If you even think a bad thought, you're like going to hell. And it's just so interesting, because that was my past. My present is that I believe that God is light and love, and I don't believe that a loving God would banish me to hell because I had a thought that he didn't agree with. I believe in a God that can't be offended. I believe in a God that is total love. So I don't want to step on any toes there, and block you off to hearing this message, but I totally believe that God can't be offended. And so when you believe in a God that can't be offended, it frees your life so much up to have a beautiful story, to be able to just feel loved and feel like you are connected with God, with the universe, and you don't have to worry anymore. And so, you can do that with your personal growth and spirituality too. So that's my present, where I am. My future is to promote light and love, and to promote a positive intent with God, the universe, and our fellow man, and to create a planet that is really focused on positive intent. So that's what the future of my spirituality is. So I'm literally changing my future. So I've changed my past because I saw my past as a limiting belief in religion and all this fear-based stuff. So I've changed my past, as well as I'm changing my future, because if I had continued on that trajectory, I probably would have been in such a fear box that I couldn't share this message with people. So that's really fun to kind of look through all those areas. I want to talk just a little bit about having new experiences. And when you are looking through the lens of threat or negativity, which is why API, or assume positive intent, is so important, but when you're looking through the lens of threat all the time, it completely transforms everything around you. It transforms your energy, your vibration, and you can't see anything through the positive. So everything you're going to attract is going to be attracted through the fear vibration. So I like to think of it this way. When you have a thought, that breeds a feeling. And that feeling then usually breeds some sort of action. And that action then breeds some sort of having. So we literally come from the thought becoming an emotion, becoming a neurochemical, hormonal chemical reaction in your body toward a vibration that actually creates some circumstance in your life. And, you can even think of something like, you have a thought like, is my business partner cheating on me? Okay. Well, you have that thought, and then you have this feeling like, oh, that would feel like such betrayal. That would feel horrible. And then you start acting in that way, because maybe you heard something and you heard it wrong, and it was like some misinformation that you got, but you have the thought, okay, my business partner's embezzling or cheating on me, and then you have the feeling and you start getting all this adrenaline going, and so you're just hyper reactive and everything, you're looking for the threat. And then you do something like you go pull all the money out of the bank because you're like, that's not, he might get that money, so I'm going to go get all that money out of the bank. And then you have the reaction of your business partner going, are you trying to steal our money? And then you create this drama. So you created everything from a thought that was a fear based or negative thought. And we do that all the time in our lives. So I would say that to really look at that, you have to start with inquiry. And when I talk about the stages in module 1, that's the first thing you do is you ask questions. So the questions that you want to ask are, is it possible that this isn't true? Is it possible that this isn't the real reality that's showing up? And the beautiful thing about API is when you're always assuming positive intent, when someone actually does have negative intent, you're going to be more in tune to be able to recognize it. You're going to be faster at getting to the truth, because if you're assuming positive intent and something is really going against that, it's going to really stand out. But if you're always looking for the threat, you're never going to see any of the positivity. You're never going to see any of the good in that. So it's really interesting how when you start looking for the positivity in things, when something actually does show up that's not right, you'll see it that much faster. So is it possible that my perception is distorted? And when I think back even about events in my childhood or my past, I started asking those questions. Is it possible that maybe I was emotional, hormonal, going through a difficult time as a teenager, and I saw those things differently? Is it possible that the negative intent or the threat that I was looking for really wasn't real? Is it really true? And I said in yesterday's module that the two worst words in our vocabulary that you can use in relationship is always and never. And when you say you always do that or you never do that, you are immediately putting up a wall. You're immediately putting up a threat. You're immediately putting up resistance and defiance. So try to remove those from your vocabulary in relationship, especially when the relationship is a little bit stressed. And ask yourself, is that really true? Does he always do that? Really? Is that really true? Does he never do that? Really? Is that really true? I mean, it may be true, but usually it's not. Usually it's some sort of distorted reality. So, and storytellers are really good about exaggerating. We're really good about distorting reality. So, I have to be really mindful of that. But wait, the reality is you have to look at what your truth is. And I love this kind of breakdown. Of subjective reality, objective reality, and infinite reality. So subjective reality, and this is all kind of fear to love. This is kind of like the stages from fear to love. And with subjective reality, it's all fear-based. It's your story. It's usually distorted, and it's the story that we keep telling. And it's the story that had some secondary gain attached to it usually, and some negative intent in it. And it just keeps perpetuating that old history. Then there's this objective reality, and objective reality is the collective story. So everyone who experienced that event will tell a different version. It's funny because you can take a police report of something that people saw, and it sounds like it's not even the same event. I mean, people will describe it from their perspective completely different. So that's that objective reality, and it is always true. It is always right. So I always tell people when they're in conflict or fighting, both people are right. And they're like, no, they're not. They're wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. Everyone's always right in conflict because you're always right from where you are. You're always right in your objective reality because it's your perception of what's going on that makes you act. You have the thought, the feeling, the emotion, and the action and the having. So in any circumstance, you're always right from where you are. In fact, you could even argue that Hitler was right because he believed in what he believed in, and he was completely engulfed by his beliefs, and he was acting from what he believed. So I'm not saying what he did was right or wrong. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying he believed he was right. So everyone's right from where they are. So you have to really look at people's perspective. And if I'm in conflict with somebody, sometimes I have to step back and I have to go, what's their story? What made them like so looking for the threat? What made them so looking for negative intent? So when I can look at their story, it makes me go, oh, I get it. I see why they're coming at me that way. And it helps me relax a little bit and assume a little bit more positive intent. And then there's infinite reality, which is ultimate truth, which is God's truth, which is infinite truth, which is that we're all light and love and we're all connected to God and the universe and each other. And so that's the infinite reality. So all this other noise, that's basically because we moved from fear to love. Everything over here is love. So if it's not love, it's just noise. If it's not love, it's fear. I call that the litmus test in any relationship, in any experience that you have. It's either fear or love. And if it's not love, then it's fear. Sometimes I tell my husband when we're fussing at each other, I'll say, honey, are you saying that from a place of love? And he'll be like, oh, oops. It's just noise and it's just fear. And, even he's like Buddha. I mean, seriously, he's like amazing. But sometimes even Buddha slips into being human sometimes. And I have to kind of remind him that, this is not infinite reality. This is some subjective reality that, it's just some distorted thing. And so I want to honor you and honor how you're feeling. But really, can you ask yourself, do I really never do the dishes? Do I really always try to do that, or so always and never, got to get out of the vocabulary. So, because subjective reality is really hard to deal with, always and never. So here are the flips. So one of the things that I want you to do is when you're feeling any kind of fear, I want you to switch that to assuming positive intent and looking at the potential excitement in things. Because, when you're on the roller coaster, you can either be like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared. Or you can just be like, I'm excited. My adrenal glands are going to squirt all over the place. And I know I'm just going to lose it. And I might even vomit, but I'm excited because it's an experience. And so you can always switch fear to excitement. Expectation. What would you switch that to? You could switch expectations. Expectations are relationship killers. I mean, it is like the worst thing in the world is to have expectations of someone. And I think it's very real to have commitments and to show up when you say you're going to show up, but to have expectations out of people, especially when they're unrealistic expectations, and you have to really kind of take inventory of that, can really hurt relationships. And that's part of assuming positive intent. I mean, I expect that my husband's going to be amazing and that he's going to be, successful. And so I assume expectations in the positive. But if you are going to assume expectations like they're going to always do the dishes or they're always going to pick up their shoes or whatever, those expectations can really set you up for this distorted subjective reality crap that just hurts your relationship. So instead of expectation, switch that to anticipation, because anticipation just says, hey, that'd be really cool if, but expectation says, if you don't, I'm going to freaking hate you. And that really hurts relationship, and it doesn't give any flexibility in relationship. So anticipation is much better. What about worry? Are you a worry wart? A lot of people are worry warts. So if you worry a lot, why don't you flip that to wonder? I wonder what could happen. I wonder if something really cool could show up. You're worried that that check's not going to be in the mail. Well, I wonder if that check doesn't show up, maybe someone else will show up with money. So wonder can really be good to displace worry. And I like curiosity. Just be curious about things. Instead of worried about things, just be curious about things. And it takes that sting out. What about disappointment? Flip disappointment to detachment. And I love the law of detachment. The law of detachment says that I'm going to focus on the experience and not the outcome. And I've experienced this so many times in my life when I've just been so focused on the outcome and not just enjoy the experience. You can live your whole life like that. I used to always say, well, when I get through med school, everything's going to be fine. And then I'd say, well, when I have my son, everything will be fine. And then I'd say, when I've got the X amount of money, everything will be fine. And you to live your whole life just in this waiting phase, and this, it's going to be better when. And so rather than be disappointment, I really like detachment. I really like detachment because detachment just kind of says, I'm going to enjoy the experience. I'm not worried about the outcome. And then addiction. I love this one, flipping addiction to preference. So instead of being completely addicted to something, saying, I prefer this or I prefer that. And it really takes the power out of the word addiction, because I think our story, when we say, well, I'm a drug addict, that becomes like you have no choice or no power over that, but you absolutely do. And you can say, well, I prefer to get high because it just feels better. just honor it and own it. That's what it is. It's not an addiction. It's just you prefer that state of being. And then when you don't prefer that state of being anymore, you don't do it. You hear about people all the time who say, I was just done smoking and I just laid them down one day. So it really is just about what you prefer. Reaction to response. Instead of reacting, how about you just kind of look for the response in things, or maybe even a different response? So there's all sorts of little flips that you can do. And the way you know that you need to flip an emotion is basically if you are not feeling good, if you are sad, tortured, or fearful, you need to start doing some flips in your emotions and feelings. And that can be really, really powerful. So, unless you're feeling really blissful, you've probably got some positive intent that you need to be assuming and some flipping that you need to be doing. So, I have a question for you. In your story, how long do you hang on, right? So, I was in a marriage for 22 years and a fabulous man, absolutely amazing. I have nothing bad to say about him, just really cool guy, just grown apart. And probably for the last 10 years of that marriage, I knew that. And he knew it. So, how long did we hang on? Well, we had this commitment thing. And, regardless of what your religious beliefs are, I had some of that tied in there too. And it was all like, well, we have to cut the 50-year anniversary cake together. And, till death do us part, even if we want to kill each other, we're just going to stay that out. At what point do you go, this just isn't working. This just isn't cool. Neither one of us are happy. And, I said in one of my other modules that when I finally made that decision and just said, you know what, this isn't serving me anymore, it was able to free him up too, because he really couldn't be honest with himself. And he really couldn't say, you know what, she doesn't really fit my needs anymore either. And he was married within 3 months. He'd found someone else and he's absolutely happy as can be with her, and it's a much better fit for him. I was just like not a good fit for him. I knew that, and he knew that. We just, neither one of us didn't know how long do you hold on. We argue for our limiting beliefs. We argue for, so we had a child, and it was like, well, what do you do with the, divorce, how does that affect the child? And it turns out that our child is so much better now because he was so stressed out with us not being happy that it just didn't feel good. So now he knows that he's got parents who are really happy and in a place where they want to be. And what do you teach your child when you stay in a relationship just because you're supposed to or you should? You teach them to be miserable too. And so what do when they grow up? They do the same thing. So really, if you can just step in and honor yourself and honor what makes you happy and be the most highest congruent loving person that you can, then you can decide how long do you hold on. And when you've assumed positive intent and it just doesn't match up anymore, the vibration just doesn't match up, and you can just say in a loving way, hey, this just doesn't match up anymore, it frees you up to have a much different life. So one of the things that I usually recommend, it's a great little experiment, and it's in my book, Dr. Tammy's Life Flip. You can get it on Amazon, but I have all these little exercises and everything in there that you can do. One of the things I recommend is that you write a letter to yourself. And in that letter, you can write in your past to your old you or your childhood you, and you can say, hey, little Tammy, or little Brenda, or little Steve, or whoever you are, hey, I love you, and it's okay. And whatever it was that you experienced is all part of the beautiful person who you are, the whole package, the whole cake. It is all the ingredients, and you're exactly who you're supposed to be. And whatever serves you in your life, I will love you and honor you no matter what you decide. Those letters can be really, really healing. I have a friend of mine who said that when she did this letter, it completely released her from a lot of her old limiting beliefs because she was hanging on to the fairy tale, to the happy ever after. And it wasn't happy ever after anymore. In fact, it became a nightmare. And she was still hanging on to that because she thought that that was the way it was supposed to be, the way it should be. Her blueprint wasn't matched up, and she wasn't able to create a new blueprint, and she was absolutely miserable. So when she wrote a letter to her little kid self and said, hey, it's okay, I love you, and I'm sorry that you were so scared, and I'm sorry that you made those little compromises and that led up to this point. It's okay, I forgive you, I release you, it's all good. And so it can be really powerful. So here is a really nice little thing that you can do in your meditation, and it's called the Ho'oponopono, and it's a Hawaiian experience. Basically, it's kind of meditative prayer, but basically, what you do is you kind of go into a meditative space, and sometimes when I do it, I'll just kind of put my hands on my heart, and I'll say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you." And anytime you have pain, like if I have like pain in my knee or pain in my back, there's a really cool thing you can Google on the internet. You can Google emotional pain sites. And so if you have low back pain, you can look and see like low back pain is abundance issues, like, fear of, not having enough money. Neck pain is like kind of like being a pain in the neck, like you feel like people are not being kind to you or whatever, like shoulder pain is carrying the weight of the world. And so all these different things have these different emotions attached to them. So if I ever get a little pain, or sometimes I get this little tailbone pain, I'll just kind of put my hands back there and I'll just say that Ho'oponopono prayer, just that I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And just kind of keep repeating that over. And that pain gets like, it's amazing. It'll like go away because I'm just kind of speaking to those areas that I truly believe those physical sites try to get our attention. And when we don't listen, and when we don't look at our story, and we don't change our story, and we keep going on the same trajectory, disease starts to set up in our body. I truly believe that. So if you find yourself with cancer, or you find yourself with all sorts of different autoimmune things, there's an area that of contrast in your life that's not serving you, that you need to look at, and it's talking to you. It doesn't mean it's going to kill you. I believe any disease you can be healed from, but it means that it needs your attention. And so if you don't give it that attention, it's just going to keep going on that trajectory. And not everybody's ready to hear that message, and I understand that. But it truly is stage 4, where you believe that life is created from you, that even disease in your body is created from you. And when you start taking personal responsibility for every aspect of your life, every aspect of your story, past, present, and future, you can change the past and you can change the future. And I'm telling you basically that time travel is completely possible. So I hope that's been delicious for you. And that's just been so fun, because that's been completely life changing for me. That literally, just assuming positive intent, I can change the past and I can change the future. So it's super cool. And you have complete control over that. And you don't need a time machine, like a little sleigh bed or anything, to go get in to make that happen, or like the DeLorean from Back to the Future. You can do that in your head. You can do that in meditation. You can do that in prayer. And you can do that in a commitment to assume positive intent. So I love it, love it, love it. I don't know if you can see this picture on here, but these are just some of the many people that are helping to share the positive intent movement. The first video I did is almost up to 3,000 views now. So I'm really excited about that little viral movement. And please share the crap out of this stuff. Anytime you see this, please just click share. If you're watching this Facebook Live right now, please click share right now, and share this movement of positive intention. Put it on your hand. Remind yourself, a little magic marker, or permanent marker, or eyeliner. Borrow it from your girlfriend if you're a guy. And just focus on assuming positive intent, because it really will allow you to time travel, and it will allow you to change your life. So it's really, really important that you focus on positive intent, and that you focus on trying to look at your life, look at your story. And when you change your story, you also change your self-worth, and you manifest from your self-worth. So we're all worthy, right? We're all creators. God loves us all the same. We are all gods. We are all creators, co-creators. The difference is that when we have this self-worth, or we have this ceiling, or we have these limiting beliefs, we can't manifest anything really cool from that space, or anything really bigger than where we are right now. So the only difference is when you start to step in to your creative ability. So that's a beautiful thing. So the next module that I'm going to do is discovering your passion. So if you are not completely rocking your life and doing what you absolutely love, you'll want to tune into that one. So hopefully, I may even try to get it done tonight. So if you're free tonight, you might want to tune into that. Maybe tomorrow before I get to it. But anyway, as soon as I get those finished up, I'm going to package them up, put them all in a nice little, neat little package, and make them all available all at once too. So they're kind of all scattered all over the place. But anyway, discovering your passion is really fun. And your passion is right there. People think of your passion as something you have to go out there and find. Your passion is in you right now.
So just uncovering that a little bit is really all you got to do, and we're going to help you find that. It's not out there, it's in here, and it's already there. So we're just going to help you find that focus just a little bit, and give yourself permission to step into it. So that's going to be a really fun one. All right, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this was a good little lunch break for you. Lots of positivity. API, everyone. Love you all. Have a very blessed day and evening, and I'll see you soon.